Okay. Several weeks ago, we talked about what happens after death. And last time we met, we talked about destiny, how everything is tied together. And we followed destiny through different levels of experience and came to a point where we realized that the outlook about what destiny was very different when viewed from the deepest spiritual realms that we work in, that from the realm of the life spirit, the realm of the Christ, that destiny is seen as an opportunity to live and to give and to lay down our lives in love. And putting those two ideas together, we're now ready to look at a different subject, which is sort of a collection of those. And tonight's talk is called What is Born 4 Times and Dies But Once. Something like a riddle. Or we're going to be talking about rebirth. When we talked a few talks ago, we talked about motion and rotation. And we talked about 2 different kinds of motion. One being a forward spinning, which from the inside looks clockwise, or from the outside looks counterclockwise. And a backward motion, which is in the other direction. We said that the forward turning motion was active in the sense that it precipitated events and it crystallized things into being. The other consciousness that is associated with the turning the other direction is more passive. It has more to do with assimilation, with observation, and drawing the essence out of things that are going away from crystallization. And we also noted that the forward going is attractive, because the very basic quality that condenses things, when we're spinning into a prayer, we condense thoughts. But when we're withdrawing or retrospecting or something like that, we repulse things. We throw things off. And we noted that the forward motion is involving and the backward motion is exvolving or evolving. I don't know how to say it. We noticed also that in terms of life, as we understand life here in the physical, that the forward motion as life went on became more and more slow. We become less active and we become more removed and we become more watchers as we get older. And then to recapitulate, we noted that at the moment of death, effectively, all of the forward motions are ceased altogether. In fact, for dead people, it's very difficult to accomplish anything in this world. It's very, very difficult because the whole direction of things is going more toward expanding out to the extents of the cosmos and taking with the gold that is the essence of all the experience that we've had. And in that process, it's very, very hard to turn things around and solidify new things. And so we noted that the death process involved decay of several kinds, that immediately after death, there was a decay of pictures in the reflecting ether of the vital body. And that these pictures were being taken out of the memory that was ours while we were living in the body and being built into the higher vehicles. And that in the etheric realm, it's just like the plant kingdom. There is no passion, there is no desire, so all the pictures themselves are neutral. they're not charged with a feeling, they're not charged with a desire or with any specific kind of slant to them. And the after-death state in this regard was called by the ancient peoples a limbo, a sort of a gray area because there was nothing really happening. The purpose for this is, it's strange that the worlds work in death is similar to the way they work in life. That the etheric world in life preserves the physical body and always keeps it alive, takes care of it, keeps it growing. In death, what happens with the pictures is that they're also preserved. It's sort of like the whole etheric realm has the quality of preservation. We've mentioned at other times that the etheric body, or the vital body, is a reflection of the Christ consciousness, which is the second attribute of the Trinity, and that is the preserver. Then there was, again, a review of all the pictures as the part of the desire body that is associated with repulsion, that is associated with selfish desires for things. As that rotted, the pictures were seen again, but the pictures were not neutral this time, but they were painful. And the quality of pain was the actual desire that we had given to other people. And the purpose here is for correction. Actually, it's a dual purpose. Part of it is correction, and part of it is cleansing. And so it's so that in the future that we don't make the same mistakes again. And this is called purgatory in the classical sense. Then the higher desires begin to rot. We even let go of our most cherished ideals, our greatest dreams. We can't hang on to them forever. And when we drop them, we refuel them. We feel everything good that we've ever brought to people. I think the nearest thing that we have on earth to it is a testimonial. Almost like, there used to be a program, I don't know, I used to listen to it on the radio. It used to be called This Is Your Life, where they had testimonials of people who were just good American people, and they brought all the people back from their lives, from the past of their lives. Some of them they hadn't seen for 20 or 30 years. Obviously, they had to find somebody that was moderately old and somebody that didn't have too many enemies and who had benefited a lot of people along the way. But when there's a testimonial like that and people are applauded for everything that they've done good and people mention their gratitude, and the person who did all the good deeds reaps a great harvest of embarrassment and feeling uncomfortable because the good deeds were enough in themselves without having to be told about them. But first, heaven doesn't do it personally. You know, there are a lot of people that if they give you testimonials, it's more of a testimonial about themselves, about how good they are to you and how much they recognize you're good. But that doesn't happen in the higher realms of the desire world. It is just a realization that you have done something right, that you've done something well. It feels good in itself, and it doesn't have to be trashed up with all kinds of personal feeling. Obviously, the purpose for this is encouragement to good deeds in the future. And this is called our first heaven realm. And after that, we talked about the disintegration of the lower mind. That is the concrete mind in all of the thoughts, all the meaning behind our deeds. Because some of the deeds that began in purgatory, when the desire body was rotting, some of those deeds actually had good intent to them. And they had meaning and truth to them, whether they ended up being positive or not. And that is what is realized when one is in second heaven and one realizes the truth behind things and how to carry out a thought all the way to its proper intention without getting things muckied up. It's easy to have that happen, because what happens, it's complicated from when we get our first intuitive or idealistic impulse. We want to do something good, but then we stop and think about it, and then we have all kinds of ambivalences in our own desire nature. Our ego gives us a writer's block, or it gives us some kind of block to doing good, because maybe the world won't understand it right, and you'll look cheap or you'll look silly or something like that. And when all of those complications come in, sometimes something becomes quite perverted, that the original intentions strike very clearly as very high ideals, but by the time they become manifest in the material world as history, they're sometimes quite perverted and a great deal different than we ever intended. I guess it's that way with any kind of creative act. It never comes out as beautiful as we see it in the inner eye, in the eye of creation. And when we can carry back all of our deeds right back to the initial thought, we can see where we went astray, where we sold out, where we didn't remain true to the principle. We equivocated. We did all sorts of things like that along the way. Okay, but we stopped there, because that's all for that we had time, or that I had energy to go on at that time. And we noted that everything was completed as far as the gleaning of experience of all of the previous life was concerned. Now we noted that there is a residue, there is a principle, let's call it a seed principle. There is a cosmic life that is the property of everyone. And that cosmic life is usually lived out by humans of very, very high evolutionary status, because they can live that life out to great perfection. All of the rest of us are duffers and hams and everything else, and we can't live that perfectly. But when somebody comes along like a Jesus or like a Buddha, they can live that higher life to great perfection, and their lives become exemplary, and they become something that stands before us as an ideal to carry through. Now, that life is sort of like an archetype, meaning a standard, a cosmic standard. And, like everything that lives has behind it a creative archetype and an ideal archetype. We're going to talk about the creative archetype in a little bit, but the ideal archetype is the ideal of what something could be, the most perfect. It could be called a theoretical archetype. And it's that way everything that lives, like the romantic poet Goethe saw the archetypes of plants and saw how the evolution of individual plants and how the experience through the group spirit was experienced. Now, in a plant cycle, all of the past condensed that little garden has the potentiality of life, and it's being. Now, in a human being, the history of all of our physical bodies, going all the way back to when we were mineral-like, all of that history, seed principle or a seed atom of the physical, which the light is located. The same is true for the etheric body, for the vital body. A seed atom of the solar plexus is a seed atom of the vital body. The desire body is seed atom is located in the liver, and near the frontal sinus in the head is the seed atom of all of our previous editions. Now, normally they are strung out in manifesting, but as we go through these assimilatory experiences, where all of the essence of all of the seed atoms is being built into just seed atoms, they become concentric. So that the seed atom of thought is within the seed atom of desire, which is within the seed atom of life, which is in the seed atom of form. They become concentric, and they become focused on sort of an invisible point, which we'll call the focus to the threefold spirit, which we'll call self. And so the strung outness of our consciousness, where we see the world as several worlds running in parallel to each other, becomes completely concentric. There is an eternal oneness, or there is an eternal nowness that is in that type of consciousness. Plus, with all the experience gone, we no longer need the bodies. So the bodies we know have all rotted away. But some of the essence of those bodies still exists as an immortal, something like a substance which is called soul. And that's sort of like let's just say a cloud of soul material that surrounds this invisible nucleus of a seed atom. And that's where we left things off a couple of talks ago. We left in second heaven where we rethought everything. Now something happens. It's the same thing that happens in a very good spiritual exercise. If you think, or if you remember, in the process of concentration, spiritual exercise that is successful in expanding consciousness is an exercise in transcendence. Doesn't come by escaping the lower experience. The transcendence comes about by fulfilling it. In short, when we think, or when we rethink our past life, but let's just say we're thinking out a simple problem, it becomes very engaging, and we think, and suddenly we realize that we are thinking. At that point, we have transcended our mind, our complete reasoning. We have transcended to a spiritual realm where we are true human spirits, where we are thinkers. This happens every time. If you'll note, there is never a time that we have a creative experience, that we have a thought that is new and original and that has the ring of our creativity to it. It never occurs but that we also recognize ourselves more clearly. Every time we think creatively, we have a transcendent spiritual experience. And in a very grand scale, to the extent that a human being can do that, now mind you, when we think of a human being, most of the time we think of a body like this, which is very untrue. To think of a human being in this regard, you have to close your eyes. And that not something like being in second heaven. There's nothing to, close your eyes and stuff your ears and such like that and levitate and all, so that you have no sensory awareness of the external world. When you're absorbed, fully absorbed in the rethinking process of second heaven, the same thing happens. The spiritual self, the threefold spiritual essence, transcends the mind. And when it transcends the mind, it enters into an experience that is third heaven experience. And that is a recognition of truth, a recognition of self, and a recognition of God and self as God. Every time that we pass through third heaven, every time that we transcend the thought process, we are indeed having what is in Orthodox Christianity called a baptism by the Holy Spirit. It's like having an idea. It happens playing chess. Probably most people have had it in mathematics. It was one of the big awakening experiences in my life to have ideas in studying geometry. When you prove a theorem, it's not only a mental exercise, but you're rationalizing abstract ideas. And when you rationalize those abstract ideas, there is a recognition of truth that is very wonderful. It's a blissful, it is a knowing that something is true. And the beautiful thing, I don't know how many of you can remember your geometry courses, but the beautiful thing is that an idea, unlike a thought, or unlike an act, or unlike a form, an idea is connected universally with all other ideas by its universality. You can't prove, you don't know when to stop when you prove a theorem in geometry, because you can keep on proving this and this and this and this. And sometimes in the recognition of an idea, of an experience, you unfold like a whole geometric system. And that's very much what it is like to recognize the idea of self. To realize that you are. Some people say, it happens to some people when, they start thinking and they think that, well, I must be in that tomato plant or I couldn't taste that tomato. We have to have something in common. And then you recognize that you're in the rhubarb and the mice and everything else. And for some people, this is a tremendously expansive experience because it can be carried right out to the stars. However, that method requires too much mental activity, and the mind soon becomes boggled by it and can't handle it. But if you just follow the idea itself and recognize that I am, and that I amness, that beingness, is unlimited, and it is in everything, and it actually even transcends thingness or objects. And something like that is the experience of the third heaven. Only one difference. It's the same that we've been looking at all along. That when we looked at purgatory, for example, if we manifested a moment of cutting anger and hurt a friend who is vulnerable to our every expression, that comes back very keen and very sharp because we're not preoccupied with the things of the material world. We don't even have a physical body to cushion us. Everything comes back very hard and very fierce. The same is true with the third heaven. We don't have a concrete mind or a desire body to get excited to draw us away from that thought, and we're carried ever deeper, ever more universally, ever more wonderfully into that thought. Now, it doesn't make any difference how long this moment of third heaven is. Quality of truth matters. Now, this idea, because we enter the way we do, we enter by looking over our past life. When we look over our deeds, when we look over our thoughts, when we're doing this rethinking that takes the essence of all the bodies to the mind and brings them into the spirit, we have an idea of what our life was like and what we intended behind every thought. Then we come to realize the initial thought that was our impulse to come to birth as the first and last concrete thought. When we think on that, on saying, I want to have a life, that's the last thought we rethink. And that is what is on our consciousness when we enter into the third heaven experience. And the effect of this is that we see our previous life, our previous full cycle we've gone through, as a microcosmic manifestation of the life of the entire cosmos. That everything in our life is a small-scale version, creation, maintenance, modification, and destruction of the cosmos. And when we rethink that thought and enter into the third heaven that way, we then enter into the most glorious idea of all, the idea of the whole cosmic creation. Now, besides being cleansing, and besides instilling in us motivations to do better next time, or to be more true in our thought, there is something about our spirit that is rather frail. We can't carry our spiritual impulses out very well. We have these impulses every day. There are things that I say to myself, I'm going to do it today and I'm going to do it right. And somewhere along the way, I waver like a reed, and there I fell again. You know what? It happens again and again and again, day after day after day. Eventually, some of those things you overcome. But after the very long and intense and very heavily crystallized and illusory, not illusionary, but illusory experience in the material world, the will to life of the spirit needs replenishment, and it needs healing. And there's something about being reunited, because we are God in this sense, to be reunited with the creative idea that God has for the manifestation of all of creation, tremendously healing. It is tremendously building to our spiritual consciousness. And this is what the activity in third heaven is all about. When we get to that kind of experience, that degree of experience, something else happens. I should mention something here about this. We see that our whole cycling happens again and again. These are these terrible two-dimensional pictures. If this is the world of concrete thought, then this is the etheric world, this is the desire world, the physical world, the etherical world, the desire world, and the world of thought. And then we have these moments in the transcendent world of ideational thought. You see, we're cycling again and again and again, perfecting and re-perfecting and developing and going forward all the time. Just as a sidelight, eventually, this experience that's called the baptism by the Holy Spirit, and they have had a yet deeper experience yet in the region of life spirit. They have the experience of Christ consciousness. And what happens eventually when a person has enough of such experience that they even transcend ideas, then the whole cycle changes. Such an individual develops their etheric nature so much which becomes a reflection of this consciousness that they can take the essence of material experience and keep it in the etheric body. And then, when they manifest the cycle one level higher. They cycle from the etheric to the realm of life spirit. In loss, this is what is in, again, first talking in Orthodox Christian terms, at the return of the Christ, when the physical world is dissolved in an etheric blaze, and we live in an energy consciousness, and like it says, there is no darkness anywhere. That will be in perpetual light. There will be no more sleeping. There will be waking consciousness all the time, and we will have the love of Christ, which is that altruistic feeling that transcends even the quality of self. So it is possible to raise this cycle to a higher level. Just to mention that we could go into this more deeply. In fact, probably next year we'll get into cosmology, and there's a whole series of talks in this series that is called Cosmology in Everyday Life, where very heavy cosmological principles are taken and used as practical everyday things for everything from taking a picture to writing a poem to writing a computer program or whatever you're doing. There are cosmological principles that can be applied to everyday living. Okay. Now, let's remember the last talk. In the last talk, we remember that when we saw the law from the viewpoint of the love that created it, we no longer saw the law as something that was a restraint. We saw the law as something that was an opportunity to give form and expression to that pure, unconditioned Christ love. This is what happens always in the transcendent realms. From the region of ideation on in, the transcendental realms, everything is more creative. And everything is done more by unifying than by dividing. If we look at our physical body, for an example, that's as deep as we go right now in the manifest realms, in the phenomenal realms, as opposed to the transcendental realms. And the whole physical body, as wonderful as it is a product of division. What we call growth is really cells dividing. What happens in the spiritual realm when something is created, it is a matter of unifying different ideas together. And when you create them by putting many unifications together, and that is the opposite process of dividing. There are other differences that the transcendent realms are predominantly giving realms, whereas the experiencing realms are basically taking realms. The realms of where we're in the desire world or in the physical world, our experience is one of taking. Now, if we put these all together, we see that the third heaven experience has a turnabout in it. That there is a fulfillment. That when we become self-absorbed, which is to become God-absorbed, and we become filled with the truth of the creative idea, there is nothing that we can do but give. And our form of giving is to say, let me take place. Let me take a part. Let me go back to birth. Is our only way of expressing right now. We can't produce forms by direct or what would be called acts of magic, or some people would call miracles. We can't create that way yet, so we have to come back to birth. And so that's what happens. We get so filled with the big plan, with the big picture, that we have to actively want to fulfill that. Now, we then start turning the other direction. We have in this life cycle that we talked about in the past when we talked about death, we said that there was a point called birth into the physical body, and then we had a point called death. And at birth, everything was forward going. But after we reach 21, or between 21 and 28, we have some backward-looking things at the same time. And there is a forward going until death. And all the while, the backward-going things are increasing. At death, they become very powerful and we then dissolve. Until we get into third heaven, and then they start. What I'm saying is, when you draw back into an idea, and you get to the origin of that idea in the divine, it loops around itself and becomes a forward-going activity. So there is something, like in the tradition that Bob studies, there is a connection between death and the deepest part of third heaven. That from death to the deepest part of third heaven, everything is unwinding. But from third heaven all the way back to birth and what we call life and death, there is a forward-going process. And that forward-going process is preeminent and most important. So this idea of what was is drawn into what is. God is. And then, in what is, it becomes what will be, what will become, where the idea is seen more in potential. And so then we start conceiving of the idea of our next life. But we don't conceive of it in saying, well, I'm going to make big bucks and have a boat with 2 rear engines in it so I can pull 6 water skiers or something like that. We don't think of it that way. We think of it in terms of the bigger picture. We think of it in terms of the whole creation. However, the whole creation has motorboats with 6 water skiers behind it, and they don't appear that way. Like those are some of the things we get lost along the way in some of the details. So this idea we have, when we start thinking it, because we are God with a small g, and because we are with God with a capital G, it does not mean that we are God with a capital G. And because our ideas are universal and true, it doesn't mean they're perfect. In fact, our ideas are biased. Our ideas are biased because our ability to ideate is only just very, very young, extremely young. We aren't very good idea formers. And our ability to form ideas, our idea to manifest, our ability to create is dependent completely upon the spiritual powers that we have awakened in the transcendental realms. They are completely independent upon past history. So here the law takes on a different kind of meaning. Even though we see this divine plan, we see it in a biased or in a skewed way by what our past history has been. As much as we've been able to see the idea of God in these realms and continuously renew these realms, to that degree can we wake up our experiences in these realms in the ideal, and so that our future creations become increasingly more perfect, increasingly of a larger and better scale. But right now, our idea of a new life is dependent, it's asymmetric, and it depends on our past lives, what we have awakened, and what we can work with. And in another way, we're somewhat blinded to some future potentialities of what we could be because we just haven't opened ourselves up to things. Therefore, when we're looking, we're not only looking with the eyes of God, but we're looking with the eyes of a very imperfected God, an unawakened, only partially awakened God. And so our creation then is at the same time both universal, because it is divine, but it's also idiosyncratic, because it has the flavor of all of our past experiences. Like suppose somebody was crushed to death for several lives in sequence. Can you imagine what a claustrophobia they would have? And how some ideas would be distorted? Because perhaps the pain and the fear and everything else that they experience, that's a tremendously hard way to experience solidity. You know what I mean? And as a consequence, there would be a strange, idiosyncratic notion of spatial differentiation. When somebody is creating the idea, they probably want to be born out in the big sky country of Wyoming and live not even in a teepee, but just out in the open all the time. You get what I'm trying to say? That at the same time, one is dealing with a universal idea of creation, but it has a idiosyncratic flavor. In the same way, when we talk, the mind, each person has a pitch that is all their own. That you can hear a piece of music by Bach, and you hear the pitch, that is the tone of Bach's mind. In the same way, there is a flavor of selfness. And that if you're dealing with another spirit, you see them only as light. And you see them only as an idea. We're talking about a recognition. If we were in between lives and we're all functioning in the realm of the Holy Spirit, we're talking about recognizing somebody as their creative urges and as their creative impulses. And we see this in living people when we recognize that creative people get a flavor of all of their past experience. It's sort of like very creative people have this bohemian type of quality about them. What they're talking about or what they're creating is universal to everybody, but yet in a strange way it has a bizarre quality that belongs to that individual only. So that at the same time that one is individuated and highly universalized, they are also idiosyncratic. And so something like that comes into our life. With the eyes of the past, but we also look at it with the eyes of God. Now this is something unusual. It's one of the blessings, but it's sort of a booby trap. This realm is, in astrological thought, Jupiterian in its nature. And Jupiter rules ideas and rules very big things. And there is a statement, I believe it's a biblical statement, that the ways of God are strange to the ways of humans. And we're looking now with the eyes of God, and we're looking with the great big picture of things, and we're looking with all of this Jupiterian enthusiasm and eagerness to be reborn, to take part in the creative work. And so what happens is we sort of, in a way, have a kind of transcendental greed that is masked by the godly optimism. And so we're helped to create our idea of life in the individual sense and in the collective sense. And we're helped by beings that could be called gods. They include angels and archangels and such like that. And they help us draw together. We look at things not completely sequentially. We don't start all of our life where we left off the last time. There are some things that the later years in the moment of death carry right directly over into the next life. But it's much more like composing a piece of music. You may start a theme, but you just can't linearly carry that theme all the way through. So you set it aside a while, and you develop a new theme. And then later on you bring that theme in. Beethoven does a lot of that. He starts a theme and then he sets it aside and he introduces a new theme, and eventually he blends the two themes together. And sometimes in the last movement there will be a number of themes of all different types. I remind you, an individual is now thinking with the consciousness of God, without the limitations of stuff. And so at this time, not only are we optimistic about our negative deeds because we're seeing them with godly eyes, and we're willing to take on all kinds of pain and all kinds of suffering because we're seeing that as the stuff of experience wherewith this godly creation is accomplished and is fulfilled. We say, well, I'll take it. Whatever it needs to be, I'll manifest that. And so the angels say, well, it would be to your benefit to take on 6 years in reformatory, which means a short marriage. Or something like that. I guess I have a little bit of that. That's my example of the idiosyncrasy of a jaded individual evolutionary course. For me, marriage is more an 8th house experience than a 7th house experience. It's more like reformation than partnership. But something like that happens. That's one thing that occurs. But we also look at all of our past lives relative to the big idea. And so maybe for three lives now we've followed a Mars-Mercury type of existence, and we've been builders. Maybe we've been architects or engineers or working with machinery or something like that. But now, when we see the big idea, we realize that it's time to start a new theme. Otherwise, the whole self will become unbalanced. And so we pick up something that we may have started a long time ago, or maybe we even try a completely new creative experiment and decide that we're going to do impressionistic music. And we're going to take on people that we've never worked with before in previous lives. We're going to deal with all kinds of strangers or something like that. Something like this is what takes place on this level. Because this level is chaos. Because when all of the manifest, when all of the cosmos has been broken down and we're at one with the universal idea, this is chaos. And in chaos, we can do creative experiments. And we can draw on all sorts of things that we've never known before, and we can begin to manifest in that way. So therefore, our life is incomplete, and we compose rather than create in a linear sense. Now, something happens at this point. We're putting together all of these ideas. These ideas are like hinted at in something like the book of Revelation, where it talks about the 7 thunders or the 7 voices. They're associated with planetary ideas, but I don't want to get too much into a technique thing. But we put together various different kinds of ideas. The ideas of thought, the ideas of form, the ideas of feeling, the ideas of maturation, the idea of timing, everything that goes into a life in abstract. And then we look upon our lives in such a way that we say something like the creation that takes place in the book of Genesis. We look on it in such a way and we say, this is so good, it has to be. And so we manifest the idea of actualization or of becoming. And that projects things out of the abstract and into first of the concrete realms again, the world of concrete thought. Now this is an extremely important moment because it's sort of like running the pace cars at the Indianapolis 500. You know, that they have the pace car running and they have all of the tiers of cars, you know, row after row of cars coming behind. And then it has to be a fair start where everybody is starting evenly and equally. And so the pace lap, everybody is revving up and up and up to get their car to an efficient level, and then they go. And this enthusiasm, you could call it divine joy. Some people even call it divine drunkenness, because it's chaotic-like, because its realm is shared by Neptune, which is the first of the chaotic planets, the transcendental planets, shares that with Jupiter. The ideas are Jupiterian, but the divine chaotic qualities are Neptunian, where everything all blends together. But when we're filled with this enthusiasm, we're filled with the great creative joy, we say, this has to be. And that is the will to life. And that is what starts the archetype. And that's what sets it spinning. That is what hollows out of space, which is completely full. Space is a plenum. It hollows out a individual space in there, a vacuous archetype. And from there on in, we build the thought of the next life, which is the mind. Everything goes through the new mind. And so at this moment, in the same way that there is one thought, the thought of thinking, and when we rethink that one basic thought, we take things from the manifest realms and magically build them into the spirit. This is something we'll talk about in the cosmology talks quite a great deal. It's the deepest of all mysteries. It has to do with the collapse of both the spiritual and material worlds into what is something like a cosmic black hole, only in a much grander sense. But in the other way, the initial thoughts, I am, therefore I think I am. You know, that Descartes' proposition is a revolving proposition. I think, therefore I am, is like going from the world of concrete thought to the world of ideational thought and realizing the true spiritual self. But when it goes, therefore I think I am, that is turning around from the realm of ideational thought and going back to the realm of concrete thought. And therefore, there is a thought that I can think of self, or of a personality, or of a life. And that is the central thought about all other thoughts. And from there, everything proceeds forward to the whole new life. Now it's really interesting the way the ancients and moderns pictured this. Now, if you read in things like the Timaeus and the Phaedrus by Plato, he talks about all of the same information, but he talks about it in a symbolic sense. He says when somebody comes back to birth, a sphere is contracted into a point, and it pulls through that point and becomes a cone. He says that, and if you ever sit in a philosophy class where there are regular academic philosophers talking about this, they laugh at this, and they say this is absolutely absurd. Now this is a shortcut language for Plato, because the sphere represents the universal spirit. And when a sphere becomes concentrated on the manifest experience, that is to the point, when it becomes focused, that is the exact process of having the cosmic universal idea and then wanting to manifest it by condensing it and concentrating it into existence. So what he's describing could almost be conceived of from the eye of the spirit that is working with the cosmos using a mathematical construct. He is producing a literal description of light, a sphere of light. God is light, being focused down to a point of light, and then focusing through that point of light into a cone, focusing itself into the phenomenal manifest realms. Now, strangely enough, modern clairvoyants don't describe it as a cone because they don't have that. I don't want to speak belittlingly of Plato, but he was working from the ideal sense, but they don't have that mania for perfect mathematics. And so this is literally seen, this point is all of the seed atoms from the past, and the self focused on them and focused through them into phenomenal realms, such that Plato saw it as a cone, but moderns see it something like a diving bell that's open like that. It's not seen as a cone. You got to remember, this is like multi-dimensional. And this projection now, this thought, the grand idea gets focused into this one simple thought, and this becomes a complex thought. And in this cone, or in this bell, are projections of light from the divinity that is coming to manifest. And these projections take on, this is the world of thought, desire world, theory. They are projected like that. And this process of projection, it's sort of like dead reckoning. Dead reckoning is a way of aiming or pointing yourself. I have a game that I play every year. I learned a very, very important technique. Every year I go across Monona Bay on the ice. And having nothing else to do, I have for years tried to make a perfectly straight line across the bay. And what happens is your path wanders and wavers, especially if you get down and lay your eye right along your last footstep, and it's amazing how much you wander, even though you think you're walking straight. I have one leg that's about a half an inch shorter than the other, and I tend to pull off that way, and the other one is stronger, which tends to pull me back eventually. But I was certain I was going to be able to do a straight line. And what I learned as a technique was I would take one object on the opposite side of the bay, and this is exceptionally hard to do. You take that one object and you keep it in your eyes. You never blink. You never think about anything else. You keep that one object in your mind and you walk to that object. You don't care what your feet are doing. You keep that object in mind. That's as close as I can get to getting a straight line. The wavers are much more gradual, and they aren't so bad. It comes pretty close to a straight line if you do that. But unless you have that kind of straight line focus. So what I'm saying is, where you focus is where you go. And that's the technique that happens here. That as the spirit is being focused through the collective seed atoms and through the focus of the mind, and where there is this miniature plant, it's like saying, like when something goes to a seed, there's something creative that happens. Every year at Christmas time, the Christ consciousness enters into the earth. And all of the seeds are given something new. So there's a constant evolution. So like even with plants, which are not self-conscious creative beings, even they are not, they're not just working out a plan with no deviation. There's a progress. There's an evolution. There is an improvement that takes place with them. Now, if we have our seed atoms, which have all of our past lives, and we have the archetypal idea of what a human being is becoming and what the whole divine plan is, these seed atoms get permeated with that idea in the third heaven experience. or they get focused into from the third heaven experience, plus the idiosyncrasy, which represents an individual behavior, gets focused into the seed atoms, and you might say from life to life, there is a mutation. Now, but it's so perfect that in the same way that the future, the whole plan, even though we may be blind to it because we haven't wakened up some things, but even all of the future isn't written out. Because the most perfect creation is the one that leaves the greatest amount of improvisation for the people who perform. So, like somebody who writes a great symphony, for example, leaves plenty of interpretation for the instrumentalists who are going to be playing it. And so the same thing happens here. We have the seed of all of our past experiences, which the divine self has chosen which ones are right now, working together with the gods, and the divine plan is built into that, plus the idiosyncratic viewpoint is built into that, plus, according to the creativity of the individual, how free they are, there are gaps built in. The freer a person is, the less their life is planned. Like some people have maybe, I would say, less than 10 minutes in an entire lifetime of freedom. They didn't even plan it all because they're not awake enough to do it. Because the gods that are going to be their national spirits or their family spirits that are going to lead them through their life to get the experiences that they need because they can't lead them themselves yet, they do most of the work in helping that God focus to produce the archetype. Some people are not even capable of producing the archetype. Some people have not had a baptism of the Holy Spirit yet. That is, there are some beings that are among the human life wave, so we wouldn't even call them, most people wouldn't even call them humans, that cannot do arithmetic. They cannot conceive of an idea. They cannot conceive of an artistic idea, and they cannot conceive of the idea of self. There are some peoples in the world that do not have a conception of self. And such people cannot produce their own archetypes. But if you have someone who is highly creative, you have somebody who's an initiator, an adept, this whole thing gets collapsed. And they can create life as they go. Some people have gaps so that there are opportunities. And it's not the big events in life that are our free times. Our free actions come more in little bitty moments. And what we do with those little bitty moments. You look at people, at older people that are enlightened people, you'll find out they treasure those little quiet moments when there aren't social responsibilities or there aren't family responsibilities, and they say, oh, I like to go and spend a few minutes reading, or I like to go and spend a few minutes praying, or I like to just sit down sometimes and lay in the sun or something like that and just think about things. Those are the really creative moments. There, everything isn't completely planned. Okay, but I'm trying to press for time because I don't want this to go on too long. But this is what happens. The archetype is built. The spirit with the will to live and the will to become focuses through it and focuses into the manifest realms. Automatically, this diving bell is drawn through the different realms, and it comes deeper and deeper into the manifest realms. As it does so, these seed atoms are set spinning, so to speak. They're set spinning with the will to live. And according to the archetype that has enlivened them in the way that they need to be enlivened to fulfill this life, as they're coming through the worlds, they draw from the manifest cosmic materials of each of the different worlds. you know that I guess we didn't talk about it too much. There's just too many things to talk about. But in the world of thought, there is a music of the spheres. And that music of the spheres is the divine plan. The divine background is constantly being boomed into the world through the macrocosmic mind. And new desire stuff is constantly being pumped out through the different planets. The macrocosmic usually works through the planetary minds or through the planetary desire bodies, and so there is like a recycling. Remember when we talked about the desire body, we said that out of the great vortex that is a whirlpool of the liver, there's constantly new desire material that's being thrown into the desire body, and then according to our desires, our emotions, our feelings, we draw it back in through various of the other vortices. And then it gets recycled and comes out again through the great vortex of the liver. Well, in the macrocosmic desire world, there's always new material being boomed out. And it's going through that same kind of cycling process. As above, so below, what has gone before in heaven will follow after on earth. And that same thing is happening on each of these realms. So this descent is not like if you drop a stone or something in the water, you follow its descent. It's sort of, especially if it's a flat stone, it sort of wobbles around and it makes its way to the bottom. There is wobbling around. In fact, the wobbling around is actually even orbital. But the descent isn't at an even pace or even at an accelerating pace as it is with the stone in the water. Sometimes there's waiting, because if you're doing something very rare, the materials that you're going to need for building quirky, new, creative thoughts, even thoughts that anticipate things that are not manifest in the world yet, those things aren't always available. There are some seasons, there are rare fruit that come to fruit and they're ripe and they're gone in 3 or 4 days, and that's the entire season. And there are things like that in the world of thought, in the desire world, not so much in the etheric world, but in the world of thought and in the desire world, there is a selective process that you may have to just sort of wait there, humming, until you can. Like the seed atoms are described very much as whirling magnets. Only they're magnets that don't draw iron, but they draw the right kind of thought material, the right kind of desire material, according to the way the seed atom is activated from past lives and the creative process. Now, all of this, I'm giving you a very abstract presentation of this. Some of this is so clear that there are even pictures of events. But you see them as the ideas of events before you start the descent coming back to birth. You say, wouldn't that be a great experience to have? And it might be somebody dying in your arms, because you recognize the faithfulness, the closeness, and such. You would see that different from the world of thought. The events of your life, after you have thought out your life, after you have pondered your life, are built right in. And then the essence of stuff that you need, like for example, just recently some very interesting material has been re-released back into the cosmos again from the death of 2 very famous French people. Simone de Beauvoir died 2 days ago, and yesterday Jean Genet died. I like that for a combination of material being released into the inner worlds all at the same time. They've left a hold on something that's a rare kind of thing. Okay. So there is the new mind, which is a product of past minds and the influences from the archetypes and the very kind of stuff that's being released into the mental world right now. And so we think out our lives, and in the thinking we draw the stuff, and this is not even going to become manifest. Like in some cases, some of the things, the changes in the earth might not become manifest until we're near dead, and some of them might even be in future lives. Some of the work when we're coming back, this is a slow process. Not only are we waiting for the stuff, sometimes in order to draw that stuff to us and to fulfill the different kinds of thoughts that we need for our mind, it's a slow process. And part of the reason it's a slow process is because a lot of people haven't practiced concentration. And a lot of people haven't practiced thinking. And, if you're trying to concentrate on something and you let your mind wander all the time, if you're waiting to come back to birth, that's going to be a long time. This is why, one of the main reasons why for many people it's 700 to 1,000 years coming back to birth. It's because they're such slow thinkers, and it takes them that long to keep their mind on things long enough to develop something. All right, so I don't want to belabor this point. After the thought stuff is developed and there is the new mind, then the seed atoms draw new desire material, and then new life is drawn around it. And then the gel closes. And this is not a tiny thing at all in some regards. There's a lot of life, there's a lot that's tied up there. Now in some cases, people have to wait a long time for parents. And if somebody is waiting for parents, clairvoyants describe this of all things as these bell-shaped things in the etheric world go orbiting around the world, and they look like comets. They're waiting and waiting and waiting for parents. And sometimes parents frustrate this activity, and even though there's a destiny there, they have to be captured by stealth or something like that in order to conceive, because some parents want to thwart the whole process. But eventually this focus, which contains the seed atom of the mind, the seed atom of the desire body, and the seed atom of the vital body, is placed in the ovum of the mother. The seed atom of the physical body is placed in the head of the sperm of the father. And then there is a conception. Now, one of the few activities where there is a positive creative process in life happens after this conception. Except in very, very rare cases, the first 28 days after conception belongs completely to the mother. So that this is an experience that you only get when you're in a feminine body, and you only get it for 28 days at a time when you're bearing children. But it means that in that very, very early beginning of the embryo, when the roughing out, when the first few divisions are taking place, the positive creativities, you remember now that inwardly a woman is charged positively in the vital body, such that even if you could do a complete sex change operation, such that you could make a uterus and everything, a man in most cases still could not conceive of a child, because there isn't that positivity in the vital body to do the creative work. And so for the first 28 days then, the mother has her own conception of what this forming fetus is and what it is to be like. And so the first 28 days creatively belong to the mother. Gradually, this draws into the womb it's in the ovum, but it's not really locked in. Now, just before the descent down through the world of thought, the desire world and such, one sees the final run-through when everything is set spinning of what the life is going to be. But that's the God's eye view. To some extent, this is even proceeded. The gods participate, the gods live it out in a mythical way, your life drama before you come to birth. And that's how you draw together the idea that is behind the archetypal thought. It's a profound process. Can you imagine that the gods are living out your life before you come to birth? And it's worth that for every one of us. And this is why things like in psychology, why the myth or the combination of myths that a person's life is, why it works out so beautifully, because it is literally that. Because that's what the gods have done before coming to birth. That is their way of demonstrating to you what is right for you and what your creative process is and what myths you are weaving and twining together for your manifestation. But then, at the quickening, when the etheric is tied in to the physical, by then we're looking from a worldly point of view and no longer a godly point of view. And when the whole etheric body is being tied into the physical at the quickening, then the ideas are seen as pictures. And they're seen as pictures of events. And what often happens then, somebody says, did I really agree to this? Did I really say I'm going to have that horrible of a life? You know, and some people chicken out at that moment. And the price of chickening out is that everything becomes much worse. That some people try to pull out at that moment. And when they do that, they break the connection between the etheric and the physical, and they produce a condition that later on becomes grand mal seizures. That is a kind of epilepsy. So they are automatic sensitives. And if you look, if you study people who have epilepsy, very often you'll find the case is that when they become self-conscious, and when they become self-conscious about how horrible their problems are, they have a moment of déjà vu, which means a withdrawal, and that's when they go into their seizure, and then they still have to go through their hard life, but it's made that much harder by not being able to hang in there and being able to live it out and having to live with all of the stigma of the epilepsy and such like that. So this is, again, a very critical moment. It's like one of the most important things for all spiritual health is like the God human realizes that there's balance, and it'll pick up a new theme, and it may drop off some old themes from past lives. So balance is one thing that's very necessary for spiritual health, but follow-through is another. And you have to carry something through all the way. And when the spirit sees things from the all-too-human point of view, and at the quickening lurches, the necessity for follow-through is brought home in a very, very hard way. Okay, and then we come back to our point on the cycle again that we call birth. But from a spiritual point of view, birth is fourfold. It's not an event that happens just once, because this is one of those neat things again. Our lives are based on the cosmic life. And the cosmic life is the whole of evolution. And in the same way that we have previously cycled through an existence of pure form when we were mineral life, our life is a replication of that. And so for the first 7 years of our lives, the vital body and the desire body and the mind that we have are not active. This doesn't mean that we can't think. Unfortunately, it's possible to force these things into action. You can force someone to think at a very early age. But instead, there is an innocent kind of thinking that is done, that the higher vehicles belong to the macrocosm. They belong to the universal spirit and not to the individual. This is why when children ask questions like, why is this, Daddy? Or why is this, Mommy? They're not asking an intellectual thought question. They're asking a question like out of innocent curiosity that belongs to the macrocosmic mind. It has nothing to do with thought. So the first 7 years, especially the first 3.5 years, one might be considered a mineral human being. Because all that is really human, that is awake, is the physical. And the physical is intensely awake. It's still soft and very, very, very impressionable. So impressionable that the very first moment, the moment of birth itself, it is so impressionable that it takes on the stamp of the whole cosmos, and that archetype that is the thought for this whole life is impressed on at that moment of birth in what we call the natal horoscope. So that if you look at a natal horoscope of someone, it is an archetype of their whole life and their whole skewed conception of the universe for this incarnation. That's why the moment of birth, that first breath, that first cry, is all important. And then we relive a mineral-like experience where we are physically acted on the same way we were acted on by the gods. We're, like we're squalling babies. Our heads are rubbed and we're made comfortable and we're fed, and the parents become the gods in the same way that we, like we were hammered around by the voices of the gods and molded into different shapes and gained those material types of experiences. Is it tremendously important in early childhood development that the sounds and the impressions that come on a child, because a child is pure impression in a physical sense, the character is very much molded in the very infantile years, and it's very important to remember that. Now, slowly, the other vehicles, the etheric vehicle, becomes manifest. But it becomes manifest in the negative poles only. Like first, the negative pole of the lowest of the four ethers, the chemical ether, becomes manifest first. That is the pole of rejection. You know what I'm saying? If you look at a little baby, it's, I don't know how to say it, it's all shit and snot. Its most active activities are elimination. It's continuously throwing off. It seems like it's throwing off more than it's taking on. And the negative pole, in this regard, Sigmund Freud is close to some truths. With his polymorphic sexuality, he comes close to some truths. The negative pole of the light ether is reproduction. And it's mostly reproduction in growth. But the growth isn't rapid as it is in the second 7 years. It's much more in a perfect cyclical type of growth. It's mathematically proportional, just like the mineral kingdom is very mathematically proportional. You can always predict at what temperature and what pressure exactly what's going to happen. And of course, an infant is all eyes and ears. So eventually the negative pole of the light ether. And then when you get up near 6 years or so, the child has an astounding memory only the negative pole of the reflecting nucleus becomes active. All right, there are all kinds of things. This is an entire study in itself, early childhood development. I've got piles of books if you want to read them on how the spiritual teaching works into early childhood development. So at birth, it's only birth of the physical body. But then, at about 7 years, which corresponds to a point way in the back, way back in our history when we became plant-like, the vital body becomes completely active. And then we are plant-like human beings instead of mineral human beings. And what takes place is we grow. And we grow rapidly, and there's incessant action. You take a child between 7 and 14, there's incessant action. There's energy just pouring and pouring and pouring all the time. In fact, if you have etheric vision, you can see the difference between a child 7 and a child 14 is that the child that is 7 has a bright, I don't know how to say it, pinkish aura that's very thick. It's not like looking at somebody who has a lot of soul. That looks like looking at somebody that has crystallized light around them that is brilliant with their light. A child that's like around 7 has all of this pinkish life. And you can tell how much a child is going to grow and how active they're going to grow by just looking at the density of that pinkish light. Because that is the life stuff that is going to become, as the archetype of the vital body comes to birth, that is how they're going to, that's how they're going to grow. Now there are a lot of things that are really important in the 7 to 14-year-old period, because through action and through life is where we develop habits. And it depends on how we're going to develop our sense perception. So it's very important. Like, I missed a lot of things in life when my life could have been much better. My spiritual awakening later in life could have come on much better if I had learned things like roller skating and ice skating and swimming and had more types of perceptive experiences like that, where through motions and through actions and through repeated disciplining, like the ability to take habits later on for positive depends on the ability to take discipline in the period between 7 and 14 years of age. Okay, so you see there are two books. The birth of the vital body or the etheric body is not as clear-cut as the birth of the physical, where you can determine the first breath or the first cry. It's a much, it's things in evolution, especially with the more plastic worlds, spiritual worlds, they flow and blend into each other. They don't have those distinct, this is the beginning and this is the end sorts of things. So that you look for events. And one of the events is the changing of teeth. That at the changing of teeth is the birth of the vital body. Now there are also 2, 3, 4, and 5 proportions that the head at birth to maturity will double. The thorax will triple, the arms will quadruple, and the legs will quintuple between an infant and so there's a 2, 3, 4, 5 percentage there. And the way the growth rate goes, the etheric body is associated with Gemini and the Aries signs a lot. And as the arms start growing, and when a child normally can put the arm around the head and touch its own ear over the top of its head, that is also accompanied with that time of the birth of the vital body when things start really shooting out. Okay. Then at approximately age 14, and usually the more mature or the more old the soul is, the more on time they are. You know that there was a thing in last week's paper that there is a 9-year-old mother. She is giving birth. Did you realize that by 18 years old she can be a grandmother at that rate? Can you imagine an 18-year-old grandmother? It just boggles me all altogether. So puberty comes early in people who do not have a lot to mature in the vital body and in the desire body. But normally the set age is every 7 years. It has something to do with the cycles of Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, especially those of Uranus, which is a 7-year cycle for one sign, or 30 degrees on the zodiac. And Uranus deals with endocrines, which are the way the spiritual bodies through the vital body make their way manifest into physical is through the endocrine system, because it isn't controlled by the nervous system or by any of the physical systems at all. The endocrines have their own way. They go straight from the inner worlds. But at approximately age 14, the desire body is born. Voice changes, hair growth changes, hormones change, and procreation is possible. Now, in the same way that a child that is between 7 and 14 is a plant child, and it has all of this life, and it has all of this motion, and action is its life. When the desire body is gradually born, beginning at 14, let's say, the person then becomes an animal human being. I don't want to say too much about teeny, but that sometimes happens. Similarities between animals and teenagers is sometimes all too striking. That's another thing. I could go on a long side trip there, but we'll just skip. But at this time, the emotions are born. The individual emotions are born. And there is no curb on them by the mind, because the mind is not born yet. And so now the feeling is all important. And someone between 14 and 21 is a pure romantic. If you listen to the type of music that adolescents listen to, it has all of that really schlocky romance to it, though there is a great deal of idealism that's in it also. And so what I'm saying is what is eventually going to mature when the spirit lives within it, what is going to mature in there is felt between the ages 14 and 21 is unchecked, you might say atavistic, romantic, emotional feelings. At this point, you cannot discipline anymore. All you can do is psychologically help those feelings to be directed so that they meet fulfilling positive experiences. We don't want to push those ages, so I'll just pass on that because I don't want to stay too much longer. I'm beginning to run out of gas. And then at age 21, the mind is born. And when the mind is born between 21 and 28, one is a complete mental person. Like sometimes you change philosophies, entire philosophies of life within a month's time. And the whole mental outlook is, you just go from thought to thought to thought. And most of this happens between 21 and 24. The year between 24 and 25, the human being is the same age that the age of the solar cosmos and our evolution in it is. That is to say, the first 7 years relate to the Saturn period. The next 7 years, between 7 to 14, relate to the Sun period. From 14 to 21 relate to the Moon period. And from 21 to 28 relate to the interesting because this is the age where most scientists and most artists do their most creative work. Like, for example, Isaac Newton had most of his thoughts in that period that were later on carried out to fullness. It's interesting to note that these are, these periods, especially from 14 to 28, things that are going to be themes for your whole life are born with the bodies. Like some people think no new thoughts after 28. They just have variations of the same thoughts. Because when the mind is born, it's like a mountain being born, and the jewels are born right with the mountain, the gems that are in the mountain, and the thoughts that are going to be their thoughts that they had way before coming to birth. The individual creative thoughts that they're going to have for a whole life, because most people don't practice a thought life where they're thinking new thoughts or pondering things and living their freedom through having a good thought life day by day. So they have their thoughts in one period, and that's the end of it. The same thing happens with feelings. A person will go through feeling themes at different ages that relates to different cycles within cycles, but that's something we'll be talking about next year. And those feeling themes become themes that they're going to carry their entire life. Okay, so that at 28, one is really into life with all the tools they're going to have. And that is what is born 4 times. A human being, in its identification of itself through its vehicles, is born 4 times. Once at age 0, once at age 7, once at age 14, and once at around 21 at majority. There is a potentiality of a 5th birth that can occur generally only from 28 and after, and that is a palingenesis. That is a birth, a second birth that Christ talks of being born in the Spirit. But that one isn't guaranteed, and that one is completely volitional, and that one is that you do by your own efforts. Okay, this has been very fast and very patchy. It's something that we're going to come back to at other times again, and we're going to talk about it in more detail with other parts of these talks. So some of these things are, it's important to realize, some of the axioms are that this idea has its own internal harmony. That to force things too early or to try and retard things produces problems. Like if parents die at an early age and a child is forced into maturity before it's ready, there's something that is forever stunted. Or if something is forced, or the child is forced to think at too early of an age, there are going to be problems, psychological and physical, at a later time. The same thing that if a person comes into their rebellion at too late of an age, where they relive the fall of humanity and the divine rebellion against the plan, it always produces psychological problems, and sometimes very grievous ones. There is a timing, and the acceptance of timing and having our education and having our discipline, be it external or social or familial, having our discipline and our education to go in harmony with the internal cycle of the rebirthing process, which takes place in a fourfold way, is extremely important. It's also important to remember that to understand the whole period of development, because what you have, you can go back and remedially develop some of these things, but it's very, very hard. If you try to change your physical body, it's almost impossible. You can do some things to change the vital body, the desire body, and the mind, but they get increasingly easier. But the thing is, the way these things are developed in their season, in their time, it pays pays to study what we're going to study in future talks in here. It pays to study cosmology to know what came right when and what principles are involved in it, so that I really don't think that an ultra job of child rearing can really be done. An ultra job of education can really be done without knowing the basic cosmic idea, the creative plan that goes into the creation of the cosmos, how that goes into an individual human life. I don't think that one can rear a child well without having at least an intuitive knowledge of that. I guess that's all I want to say. That's enough. I don't even know what we're going to talk about in our next talk. It'll be a surprise to me. Are there any questions on any of this? Great. We'll continue on with another topic. I think we have about 3 more meetings left at most. 3 of this one. I think what's going to happen with we're never going to get to the ephemeral. We'll carry out the horary. This one is just going to go on for several years. But the ephemeral part we'll never get to in the ephemeral horary and electional astrology. So what I'm going to do is next year I'm going to have only classes on Wednesday night, I'm thinking. But for 3 successive Thursdays or 4 successive Thursdays next fall, I will do that ephemeral part just to finish it. For people who want to have the grand finish of it, and I'll send tapes to you. Yeah. What I prepared to say, but much, much more and altogether different things. I know where you were before you came. Great. Oh, that's all right. No, it's perfectly all right. Things are coming up well? Yeah, it's too early for asparagus. Rhubarb must be out of the ground already, right? The peonies must be about that high already. Bigger than that already. Yeah.